I am here to talk about banking and branding and M&A today. M&A and branding are actually two things that don't go together as much as they should. And at Adrenaline, we do a lot of branding. We've rebranded more banks and credit unions than anyone. We've touched more branches than anyone, and that has led me specifically to the conclusion that brand is truly not considered enough when considering M&A and when entering M&A. And so many of you in this room may be faced with it, whether you want to be or not. And I want to talk today about what brand really means in light of M&A. And what it really means is being inherently connected to business strategy, being inherently connected to culture, and ultimately to trust. And strategy, culture, and trust are all part of Big B brand. And I hopefully want to teach you some things about what to think about for your organization. But first, some headlines that you may have seen starting last year are things like this about M&A growth. Has anyone seen a headline like this in the last year or so? Maybe. Or maybe like this, or like this, and on and on and on. And so all of the trends over the last really 6 to 9 months have been pointing to a resurgence, a revitalization in banking and M&A, ultimately leading into really the stat from American Banker that in 2025, M&A is expected to increase 25%. Now, further, there is a conference in banking, the preeminent conference for being acquired or acquiring, and it is called Acquire or Be Acquired. You have to love banking. And at that event, M&A was back on the table. Everybody's high-fiving and celebrating, and the survey that they conducted, 43% of bank executives were saying they are very or somewhat likely to buy another bank before the end of this year. And the reasons were, as you might imagine, scale and geographic expansion. And around the same time in January, all of the big consultancies started saying the same thing, like this stat from Price Waterhouse, 76% of financial CEOs planning to make an acquisition. But everybody did have a note that we have some uncertainty, margin pressures, and interest rate problems, and geopolitical tensions. And geopolitical tensions we have had. So let's look at what has actually happened. So by the end of Q1, while there was definitely a pause in around February, what we ended up with was 34 actual deals that happened by the end of Q1, and this actually marked the highest first quarter total of deal value since 2021. And so what's happening here is that deal activity is picking up, and you can kind of see the trends here. Certainly after COVID, we had a boom in 21, and then we went way down because of the interest rate environment primarily in 22, 23. And now here we are in 25, ticking up in activity, but ticking up even more in value. And all of the predictions that we already heard, all of the major investment banks are saying those will still happen. They are just a little bit delayed because of some of the economic turmoil. And so what this means for many of you is that probably half of you that are sitting in here may face an M&A. So what do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? I want to tell you how. And as I said earlier, brand, Big B brand, to talk about it in banking terms, can be an asset or it can be a liability. And quite literally, this is how that works. It can grow trust or it can erode trust. It can connect cultures or it can divide them, or it can drive value ultimately or undermine it. And I'm going to talk about some relatively famous M&As where these things either happened or didn't happen that truly drove the value and the futures of the businesses related to them. One good thing, it's a recent branding study on the ROI of rebranding that Adrenaline conducted last year. 3 of 4 executives said they believed that brand value critically impacts business value. I hope that's true, and I'm going to show you that it is with, these lessons learned. Lesson number 1 begins with some familiar faces, Facebook and Instagram. over 7 years since the acquisition of Instagram, Facebook's valuation has increased by a mere 260%. Pretty good. Now, of course, Meta. And the reason that it happened was in and around the bullets you see here. There was very early strategic clarity around how Instagram was going to fit into Facebook's ecosystem. And Instagram was known for visual storytelling that Facebook didn't have yet, but Facebook had a more robust platform, a more robust infrastructure than Instagram did. And so they had very complementary strengths. And further, they decided they knew exactly what they were going to do with the brand of Instagram. They were going to preserve it, and they were going to resource it. And then as they executed thing by thing, any of the integrations you may have seen happen in your own apps, they did it very carefully and thoughtfully, and they made sure it made sense strategically first. Everything from the monetization of ads to combining chat functions, whatever it was, they started with strategy, and it was successful. A story that was not successful, that many of you may not even know or remember, but at one point, eBay acquired Skype. They thought that was a good idea. The thought was, they thought that actually sellers and buyers wanted to talk to each other, and this great platform Skype was the way to do that, but it turns out that actually people just want to talk to like their grandma on Skype, and buyers and sellers don't want to talk to each other at all, besides what they absolutely have to. And so there was really a strategic disconnect from the start, integration misfires, and then ultimately a couple years later, eBay sold off Skype, and Skype sold it to Microsoft, who now is going to, in 2 weeks, deprecate Skype. I'm sorry if I'm telling you this and that's upsetting, but Skype is going away, and Microsoft would like you to use Teams now to talk to grandma. So this was an example of not good, and it was not good because the strategy really didn't make sense. It might have made sense at the highest level, but right below that, when you think about how people actually operate and conduct business, it didn't make sense, and that was bad strategy. And so that leads to lesson 1 of starting early with strategy when it comes to M&A. And some of the things you need to think about to start early with strategy are questions like, what equity does each brand possess? What does it stand for? What is it known for? What name or brand should we go with? What is our brand architecture strategy? Should we have a dual brand? Should we have a combined brand? Do we need a net new name? How do we strategically fit together? How do we take the sum of the two parts and make them greater than 1 + 1? And how, in everything we do with merger integration, how can we lead it with strategy? This is showing that actually there is proof that strategy works. 40% of successful integrations began planning early during deal screening. And this is something else that happens, especially in financial, in the rush to make the deal happen. Things like strategy, and certainly everything related to brand, no one is thinking about it. But according to Pricewaterhouse and other studies like this, you can see that successful organizations that are spending more money on strategic integration and strategic planning come out on top ultimately. So something else about brand, and this is getting into the connection into brand and M&A and what brand really means. 23% improvement in value by executing the right brand strategy, and 19% value at risk. That is almost 20% in roundup terms of value you could be missing if you get the brands wrong. And again, so many CEOs are just not thinking about this because they want to get the deal done. 42% greater chances of success overall. That is a huge number if you execute correctly on the brand. Now, I want to show you an example coming from mega global brands to a regional bank brand, Flagstar. So Flagstar was actually an acquisition by New York Community Bank of Flagstar. They are now combined $100 billion, over 400 branches. But when they started, they were working with this. And the top bank, New York Community Bank, who really nobody knew of or had heard of, because it was a holding brand for 8 other division brands, was the acquirer. Flagstar Bank, based in Michigan with nationwide presence, maybe didn't want to go to market with the New York Community Bank name all over the country in the Midwest, and also these brands individually had no collective brand power. They just had individual brand power. And then during this integration, they acquired failed Signature Bank, which made a lot of headlines. And so New York Community and Flagstar were very much in the news during this. Now, what the End Up brand turned into was this: a combined Flagstar name and brand, a singular name, dropping the bank, wanting to become a lifestyle brand. And what I want to show you is some of the thinking behind it. So when planning for merger integration, every investor deck has a slide that looks like this. It's got all the branches plotted, and you can see this is a very interesting plotting with New York Community in gold there and Flagstar in the red. And then if you split out all the division brands of New York Community, you've got a lot of disparate geography, and you've even got some overlap. So there was some cannibalization of brands, and there's a lot to work with. Now, when considering for your organization what options look like, this is the type of thinking that Flagstar was doing. So in scenario one, we could either have a New York Community brand or keep the division brands. We're gonna have to say everything is a division of New York Community Bank, and we can keep the Flagstar brand when it is and everything becomes a division, but we're managing a house of brands, or in this case, really technically a multi-brand family. A second scenario is that we use the Flagstar name. It's not geographically limiting. So again, in these scenarios, think about the equities, the attributes of the names of both. And it doesn't really matter who the acquirer is. What matters is the ultimate equity the new combined brand will have and leveraging the best of both sides. And so that would be good. You'd have a non-limiting name. It's definitely ownable. They don't have to go through any type of market research and availability, or you could have a new brand identity with the Flagstar name. And something to consider also when you are combining organizations, if the acquired brand becomes the main brand, how does the acquiree feel that we just acquired them and now they're becoming the name and the brand? So creating a net new brand identity actually creates a lot of cultural cohesion optimization, and that's ultimately the route that they chose. And so this was the new brand. And one of the greatest things about this brand is that it was color distinctive. So you don't see a lot of gold and orange and honey colored logos on black, and also the condensing of New York Community Bank. So again, we took the brand identity from New York Community Bank, the gold, but made it completely more modern, completely more ownable. And so this is a way of bringing two cultures together under a new singular brand. And then this is what it looked like in manifesting in digital channels and physical channels. And you can see how this mark is very successful in large scale, in small scale, and the pop of the black makes it very strong. So great, this was very consistent. And if we start to look at the branches, now we have great unity. We also have great standout power. Again, red, blue, green, those are the most common colors in banking. So think also about what we call ownable color palettes and ownable color families. Look at all of the colors of the brands in your market. In their case, they had to look certainly in their markets, but really countrywide. And so this becomes now distinctive and ownable. And actually, although I am admittedly biased, this rebrand specifically of the physical channels, which is not easy, was one of the best, I believe, that's ever been done because it was so consistent throughout. And so you can see all of the pieces and parts that they worked with. They actually optimized marketing in every branch, and that's something else. My colleague Juliette D'Ambrosio is speaking on Wednesday about marketing in the branch. If you are not thinking about leveraging your most expensive channel for effective marketing, you need to be. And that is something that through this rebrand, Flagstar was actually able to optimize the branch as a marketing channel. You see it here, and there was on that left bottom picture certainly some room for improvement. And so every single branch has localization, they have optimized marketing, they have digital, but they have consistency. So localization and consistency together. Now, some of you may be thinking, why is she showing this story? Because this brand has been through a lot in the last year. And if any of you have followed what they have gone through, it included infusion of capital that resulted from major losses related to CRE and their portfolio within CRE that put them up for risk. And then when they acquired Signature, a lesson we'll learn later in some other lessons, when you are acquiring kind of a fire sale situation, it may seem like you're getting a lot of value on the cheap, but that also comes with a lot of risk. And so they went through a lot. But what I'm happy to say, and what we have seen with Flagstar, with Steve Mnuchin and Joe Otting, they have come in, gotten the funding, and they have turned the bank around, and that is now leading them into reaching full profitability last year after, again, major losses. And so what they have said, this is Joe Otting, the merger marked the company's turning point on its return to consistent profitability, and most interestingly, they are in a better position strategically. And sometimes getting into a better position strategically takes a dip. And if anyone's read The Dip, you know what that means. But it is paving a way to better. They've been through a lot. Really proud of this bank and really proud of how they took a merger and acquisition situation, capitalized it, and used it to turn the bank around. That leads me to lesson number 2. More names that you know. Certainly if anyone has kids like me, you especially know these names. The Disney-Pixar merger is wildly lauded as one of the most successful mergers ever. And the main reason was in and around shared values and culture. So Pixar, and as many of you know, Steve Jobs was a major influencer at this time and involved in this deal and stayed involved after the merger. Disney understood the value of creativity and the culture of creativity and what that meant. And so when they acquired Pixar, they preserved that at all costs. And so when this happened, this was really 2 + 2 = 5. And they created shared practices back and forth. They had cultural integration. You can see the valuation. And they actually elevated the culture of each other's organization. And so they thrived. And the result of that changed the course of the animation industry. And if any of you have watched many of these movies more times than you wanted to with your children, what you are also finding is that they're actually enjoyable. This is beautiful storytelling, and it was because of this merger that this was possible. Now, let's look at one of the other most studied in business school colossal failure mergers of all time, AOL and Time Warner. And like culture made the other one work with Disney and Pixar, culture made this fail. So this was something that looked good on paper and looked good on the balance sheets, but did not work in practice. AOL was like a startup tech company, and Time Warner was this massive, stodgy media giant. And this is actually why, if any of you have been involved or have heard about fintech mergers with banks, there's a lot of banks that are buying fintechs, and there's some good stories there and some good reasons to do so. But when you get a culture of a tech company with the culture of something that is really institutional and completely different, you've got an uphill battle, and so they certainly had one here. They did not integrate well. The idea here was they wanted to be the next media giant, and maybe they could have been the next Netflix at the time in 2006 when this happened. They wanted to bring internet together with media, but because of the lack of culture, and ultimately what business schools will say most about this, is that there was not leadership vision alignment. They did not have the same vision of how the world should be. Time Warner thought it was just about content, and AOL thought it was about fast connectivity. And so ultimately, they lost over $1 billion in just the first year, $200 billion as an ultimate loss from this merger, and then AOL ended up being dissipated and sold off in parts, and so sad, gone, complete failure. And because of culture. Culture is the silent currency of every merger and of any merger. And it is everywhere, and like a fish swimming in water, you can't see the water, but you're breathing it every second of every day, and without it, or if something's wrong with it, you can't live anymore. And so culture, further, it is the only sustainable, according to Richard Branson, competitive advantage that actually is in complete control of the business. And it's not given enough. It's not given enough focus and time in the sun. And brand and culture in M&A need to work together. And in some ways, brand is culture and culture is brand. If you do not build a cohesive, integrated company from the inside out, you cannot thrive. And if you talk and look at any merger, certainly in banking, I guarantee you, let's call it 7 times out of 10, if it has failed, they will say it failed because of culture. So if you think about stats about culture, so this is McKinsey, proving out that over 60% more cost and revenue synergies exist when you effectively manage culture during M&A. And this does not mean at the end of M&A, when it's all done. This means as early as possible. So here are some considerations when you are thinking about facing M&A with culture. What are the beliefs and values of each organization? Where do they overlap? Where are they completely different? How do people show up for work every day? The working climate. What are barriers to unification? Is it just geography, or is it things that are much, much deeper than that sometimes we don't take time to notice? And then how do we share advocacy and embrace of change? If people reject change, the change will not happen. So I want to tell a story of a beautiful story of culture integration, and it is of 2 credit unions in Vermont that became then the largest credit union in Vermont, now combined at $3 billion, launched in the fall as East Rise Credit Union. You may not have heard of it yet. It was NEFCU and VSECU. And those are not easy to say all those words together. It was New England Federal Credit Union and Vermont, thank you, State Employees Credit Union. And they came together to form East Rise. And this identity represents the hermit thrush, which is the state bird of Vermont. Their new credit union tag, All the Difference, referenced from the poet laureate Robert Frost, if anyone knows that poem reference. That became their beautiful tagline. And this identity, it's bold, it's fresh, it's different, and it is unique to them. And so you can see it here start to play out in the logo mark, in the brand system, in all of the colors, and in things like badges and stamps and patterns and textures and photography. All of the photography is local. They are proud of their people. They are proud of Vermont. And you can see it showing up in a family of texture, a family of colors. And I'm just flipping through this kind of brand porn, because it's like beautiful. And then All the Difference, their tagline, it shows up virtually and digitally, and it shows up physically as well in the branch environments. And so everything came to life again just in the fall, and it turned out actually to be an incredible unification. But one of the most interesting things about this is that even though you'd think, 2 credit unions in Vermont, same, they very much weren't the same. They had 2 very different cultures, and they said that actually VSECU was a Birkenstock culture and New England was a Blazer culture, and that had to come together. And so culture was given the utmost importance from get with this integration. And so as we looked at culture integration, it starts with a foundation, their position being doing better, their purpose, their values, and they put a lot of work into what this was and how it had a shared co-creation to come to life, to care for our people and communities. We serve building strong and sustainable financial futures. And so this was their new cornerstone that they could both believe in. And as these brand values came to life, connecting, making impact, elevating everyone, delivering better, and even in the branch environments, in the corporate environments, these became celebrated and they had ways to live them. They had an incredible event where they brought all of the employees of both credit unions together and celebrated, and you can see some pictures from that. They had executive endorsements. They explained what it means. They explained why it's good for everyone in the credit union and also Why is this good for members? One of the most important things we need to do in a launch is prepare employees to talk to members about what is happening. And also, why did we do this? What does this mean? What are aspects of our logo? Every choice was deliberate, and ultimately every choice had a strategic foundation. And then with the culture, what does East Rise act like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? We just co-created something new together, and we are bringing it to life together. And that is how you get true enrollment. And what a beautiful quote from John, the CEO. The rebrand transcended the name and logo to become a reset of our organization, creating unity and setting our teams up for success. It provides critical direction for our North Star growth, and especially coming from a CEO. What a wonderful thing to realize and to say. And I think Javon and Yvonne, are you here? Are you in the audience? If you are and you're hiding, I'll get mad at you later. But Javon and Yvonne led this rebrand. We actually have a podcast we just did with them on it, and congrats to them and this incredible achievement with this brand. Leading me to M&A lesson number 3. And we're gonna go to banking for this one. Some of you may not even remember that in 2004, Jamie Dimon was not with Chase. He was the CEO of Bank One. And Bank One acquired Chase. And as the history books say, they acquired the assets, but really they became Chase. They adopted the operating system. And so what became from a $58 billion to now a $4 trillion deal, at the time this was the 4th largest bank, and now it is the largest bank. And the reasons this succeeded were related to leadership continuity. Jamie had already garnered at this time absolute trust in his shareholders, trust in his people. And as they began this merger integration, they ended up being almost the picture-perfect manifestation and representation of culture change communication. They communicated from the beginning the why. They had shared vision, they had shared values, they had a reputation, and they knew that they could bring this thing together, but they had to do it from the inside out. They were not rushed. They took their time. And then I thought I'd contrast that with a just colossal failure that ended up contributing quite literally to the 2008 financial crisis, where millions of Americans lost their homes. So this was bad. And this is another situation of a rush with something that seemed it was a good deal, a bargain, if you will. And so when B of A acquired Countrywide, they thought that the housing shortage was temporary. They thought that this was going to give them a foothold in the mortgage market, and they thought that they could get ahead with getting something at bottom of the barrel pricing. What ended up happening, as I mentioned earlier, with great volatility comes incredible risk. So this was a reputation liability from the start. When they acquired Countrywide, Countrywide was not in a good position. Again, they thought they could turn it around. It was rushed, it was misaligned, and ultimately there was a massive erosion of brand trust. This was brand trust broken at scale. And so the losses from this were unbelievable. It was a litigation tsunami of tens of millions of dollars alone in litigation, and ultimately heavy billions of loss. And so one of the big lessons here is don't rush things that may not make sense, and especially when they come with high liability and high risk. You are trying to bridge a trust gap, and trust is brand. Brand is trust. People want to do business with brands they trust, period. And actually, if you don't remember anything from what I've said today, remember this stat from Deloitte. In banking, 36% of people who switched post-merger did so for emotional reasons, the first of which is lack of trust. When you break brand trust, you're finished, you're gone. When you have brand trust, it becomes a currency that can weather any storm. Trust is brand. And so here you see some stats. 8 of 10 must trust a brand before transacting. This is according to Edelman, who does a brand trust survey every year. 55% are more likely to engage with those that have a strong story. People buy stories, and stories equal trust. And 40% of M&A brands that have an initially positive reaction continue to be perceived as trusted a year later. And so this is stats behind why you have to come out of the gate completely prepared. You have to communicate early and often and often and often again, more than you think you do. And you have to start from the beginning internally. I mentioned earlier about branding from the inside out. That's the way to do it. When you have internal brand advocates, they will be external brand advocates. Customers will believe, members will believe. So here's some considerations around this lesson, the country ride lesson, if you will, or the chase lesson. How can we leverage our equities and build on our equities? How should we communicate change, and how often? And the answer is very, very often. Many of our clients, as we're rebranding, actually have internal advocacy committees and teams and working groups where they get cross-functional people from across the organization to be part of advisory groups that are actually saying, these are the things people are worried about, these are the reasons, these are the things people are saying, so they can be addressed. And then what's our narrative around the merger and how to manage it? Ultimately, all people care about and worry about when it comes to change is, what does this mean for me, good or bad? So you have to both reassure people that things are not bad and ignite interest that actually this is a good thing. And this ultimately leads to bridging the trust gap. This example I'm going to show you, this is another credit union example, is so hot off the press, it hasn't externally completely launched yet. It is launching this week, although they're not mad at me because they have actually launched this in a number of aspects ahead of time because of some unique circumstances. So $2.5 billion, greater Boston area, 20 branches, and this represented 3 credit unions coming together. Merrimack Valley and Bridgewater had actually been operating together for a couple of years, which is kind of a little bit of a brand nightmare, a division of, dual branded everything. They had some COVID issues, some other internal challenges, and so they operated that way. And then there was a 3rd credit union, RTN, that came. So 3 credit unions had to come together, and if anyone has ever tried, well, to make any decision, but certainly to make a decision around naming and get your board to agree, etc., we have 3 boards we need to agree. We have 3 executive communities we need to agree, and so we'll talk about how we did that, but ultimately that turned into Bright Bridge Credit Union. Now, everything in and around this was done to bridge trust, period. Here you see, this is their internal positioning. This is not external. This was their brand position, people first, and some principles around this, being direct, being dynamic, being down to earth. And if anyone knows anyone from Boston, those are very nice ways to describe how they communicate in Boston. And so that had to come through in a positive and very optimistic way in everything that was done. Now, this video is going to actually show how this was not the brand launch video. They decided, because they had 3 credit unions coming together and because of some unique laws in Massachusetts that meant you had to have every member vote to approve this merger and the new name, they had to communicate it ahead of time, and they had to do so in a way that was building trust with their membership and their communities. It was done to build trust, to communicate from the voices of the executives of all 3 credit unions, and done with cultural efforts throughout the credit union to communicate and ultimately High, where Brightbridge had a spirit of optimism, a spirit of inclusivity, a spirit of everyone is welcome here. Bright portraits, it's got an unmistakable look, fresh colors, things that feel very legitimate, very genuine, like they've been here before, but they're also new. And so John is kind of our Jamie Dimon in this case. John was the embodiment, he was the voice, he was the face, and so everything was done with complete personalization. The advertisements, even all of the reach out, members' names personally, employees' names personally, over communicating over and over again and seeding the change before it happened. And some brands like Eastrise were unveiled at the same time, and many brand launches we do have a grand reveal because of this and the nature of 3 areas in the greater Boston that are a little bit disparate geography-wise, and we couldn't keep everything contained. We had to get ahead of it to communicate like this. And again, FAQs, robust, why is this happening and why is it good for me? The spirit of optimism visually carried through in everything from plastics to branches, the signage that just went up. Yes, it is still snowing in New England right now. And if you live in the Boston area, you'll see ads going live as of this week. So John said, with the 3 brands coming together, I'm so thankful it was received so positively by employees and by members. Now we have a brand we can do something with, and this is them just getting started. But if they did not get started from the inside out, communicating to all of these audiences so robustly, so consistently, and so well, they wouldn't be set up for market success. That ultimately is where they're going. So your playbook for M&A strategy really looks like this. Number 1, start with strategy and start early with strategy. If things are not fundamentally aligned strategically, ultimately you will have to change course. And while the fundamentals, of course, for M&A need to be in place, if they don't make sense strategically, you will never get the enterprise value that you're looking for, and it is so underestimated and underlooked at, especially from a brand strategy perspective. The second being about culture, and I will say most executives recognize that culture is important, but what we have seen in M&A is that sometimes it is not considered as early as it needs to be. It's not just the brand launch event where we should now we care about people's opinions. You have to start very early, get advocates, get enrollment, and combine the 2 organizations, whether it's a merger of equals or truly an acquisition. And then the third is about trust. If you do not bridge this gap, you will ultimately not win hearts and minds of people internally. And so when it comes to rebranding in M&A, that involves a tremendous amount of transparent and successful communication. And if you do these 3 things in broad brush, you will have a successful M&A, at least from a brand perspective, but remembering that really brand is strategy, culture, and trust. And I will leave you with a Henry Ford quote: if everyone and everything moves forward together, success takes care of itself. And that is what in M&A, branding will do. So thank you very much. We have booths at Adrenaline in both ballrooms, so please come talk to us if you are facing any of these conditions with branding or M&A. Happy to speak with you. Thank you for sitting here, and enjoy Vegas.